Yeah, run through that.
We're now recording.
You've used that button before, but I have.
They're kid proof.
Two right now.
Yeah, so short.
Yeah. Brent, Tobler's gonna be on.
He's on.
So that's three.
Is this the right house? Of course, it's not working. Well, there's it. I'm looking at my computer. I should be looking at that one.
Got three.
Yeah.
It's online.
Guys from Central, they aren't here yet.
You got Central guys?
Yeah, we have Mike Whimpey and Robert Moore.
Mm.
They might think they know a lot about this. They can come.
Does the city have anything to do with the North Point?
Transfer station. Sure. Yeah. All of our garbage goes there.
A giant frustration there.
What is it?
Drive up
Yeah.
and on the southeast corner, the beautiful entrance.
This computer
All the
doesn't
way
have
up, all the
PowerPoint,
way down. A lot
so we
of times there's 20 trucks in a row. Just dump
The like
grass.
up
and drive.
Google slide.
Slides, yeah, but it usually messes your formatting up.
That's that green fill
We'll see.
open for a while. It's been a couple of years. And it's,
I can use the dry erase board if I need to.
Okay.
The green pill?
the green fill entryway.
Oh, yeah, they've changed their entrance altogether.
You can go through it and go up the hill.
But it backs out. All those cars that you see around that on the other side would be out in the street and blocking the street. That's why they don't do that. Because they come out into the street and they cause a problem, blocking traffic.
The green fill, when I've seen it, there was never a line ever there.
There's
the green fill.
That's at the check station though. It's pretty close to the entrance, so the cars are gonna back out into the street.
What they'll do lots of times, they'll have the guy out there standing, and if you're green waste, he just waves you on through.
That's true.
Way
It's
beyond
just that they
through.
don't, I don't see that.
They need to
I want
advertise
that. I
that,
want
so
that.
especially for Orem residents or any other resident that can.
Well, they check you.
bypass.
They check you if you're warm or not, you
Well,
know.
they do, but not until you get up to the.
I mean,
I need to get,
lots of times if there is a big line backed up, they'll be out there checking. If you're green waste and warm resident, just flags you off.
In theory, I've never seen it.
Oh, yeah, I think that happened.
I sit there for an hour, trying to get through. And then they say, well, it's fun.
I know what you're saying.
Let's walk a second. There we go. Not have to wait so long there.
What do you think?
Soon as this is on, we'll just get started. We won't do the minutes because we don't have a quorum, and then we can start with the meeting. Hopefully we'll have one more show and then we can approve minutes. Otherwise we will do the minutes next time.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. Welcome everybody, and who we got online?
with Brent.
Brent's online. Welcome, Brent. We won't do the minutes right now. I don't think we need to do introductions, do we, then, Chris?
We'll introduce Scott when.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and introduce Scott then.
Okay, well, we're privileged to have Scott Bergendorf with us here today. He is the Provo River Water Commissioner. And we didn't make up that title. It is a real title. There are water commissioners.
Somebody made it up though.
So, somebody, I didn't. It sounds really official and everything, right?
That's what they
Like
say.
a livestock commissioner or something. We have river commissioners over all the major river and basins that we have in the state of Utah. Scott is our river commissioner for the Provo River Basin, or Provo River, and he assists us in managing flows on the river and making sure that those who
So I'm Scott Bergendorf. I'll just introduce myself really quick, and then I'll get into the PowerPoint and describe, what commissioners do, and then how I manage the water rights and how I manage specifically Orem's water rights. So I'm originally from Idaho. I grew up there, was raised there, and then I moved. I got a bachelor's degree in geology and a master's in hydrology up in Idaho, and then when I worked for the state of Idaho, that's how I got familiar with water rights and everything, is doing Idaho water rights with the groundwater side of things. And then when this position opened up, I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn how to do surface water, and surface water is a lot more exciting anyway because you can see it and you're not just pretending that it's there. And so switched over, and so we've been in Utah for 7 years now. This is my 7th year on the Provo River. And then I also, as of about 2 or 3 years ago, I started doing Hobble Creek as well down in Springville. We live in Springville. So, but anyway, that's
Good morning,
me.
Robert.
Got wife and 5 kids, 10 and under. So that keeps me busy and keeps my back sore from wrestling kids all day, but it's a lot of fun. All right, so I'll get started. This is just this is a picture of Deer Creek, just a reminder that we don't always have a ton of water. This is a couple years ago when things were a lot drier. So it's nice that things have changed the corner a little bit for now.
That's the island that sometimes is
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah.
there it's not an island.
there. Yep. All right, so what is a river commissioner? So one way to describe it is kind of like a water cop, where I kind of just regulating. So I'm looking at all the water rights going in and coming out, and I'm tracking everything. And then, so on the Provo River, there's nearly 2 million people that use the Provo River. So I make sure that the water gets where it's going to be. So water rights are all tied to the flow of the river, the level of the reservoirs, and so it's all about who's diverting what, making sure nobody's taking too much water, telling people when you do have water available. And that's one of the things I do with Orem is I say, here's your water right portfolio. You've got a bunch of water rights available to you. How do you want to use them? Certain water rights are available at certain times of the year, certain ones are not. And so we kind of strategize and go over that. And then sometimes things get a little crazy when you're fighting over water rights. And then just a quick basic overview of water rights. Are you guys familiar with prior appropriation? Is everyone? So prior appropriation is saying, and so if you look on, this is a map of the U.S. with the different type of water right law that there is. So the Western United States is what's called prior appropriation. So that is first in time is first in right. So whoever started using the water right first, when they settled the area, so when the pioneers came here, they were the first ones to be using the water, to be diverting it, and using the water means to divert it off the river. So a diversion is considered
You're taking it away from the river or the stream.
And so then they've established a water right, and so from that period in time, they're the first in line to use that water. So even if somebody's further upstream and has access to the water, they have to make sure that the person downstream in time gets the water right first. And so that's what that means. First come, first serve, or first in time, first in right in there. And so essentially what that does is allows as much water to be put to beneficial use, and it provides a regulation and order, like a line. So so the people that were there first get the water first, and so on and so forth.
Do you want to just briefly explain riparian, just to kind of contrast that?
Yeah, so the difference between appropriation and riparian, which is very common in the East, where there's not so typically the difference is there's more water there than there is here. So essentially riparian, and I'm not super familiar with it, but the basics of it is if you have a property bordering the river, you essentially gives you the right to divert the water. And I think there are certain limitations, but essentially they don't really, it's not you were there first, so you get access to it. It's you're touching the water, so you get access to it. It's generally riparian. So it's quite a bit different. I typically, a lot of times I'll deal, especially at Hobble Creek, where there's a lot of water users that are not familiar, that have moved from different places, and people move from back east and they start using the water thinking more of the riparian side of things. And so I have to educate them on that difference and say, no, that's not how it works. There's not free water for all. It's quite a bit different.
Flash your badge.
Right, flash my badge. Yeah.
That or a gun.
Right. So, okay, and here's a kind of a simple scenario. So looking at this, so Q is how much water is the discharge. So here's our river going downstream. So Q is, in this first scenario, Q equals 10 CFS. There's 10 CFS in the stream. And there's 3 water users downstream that want the water. When you add them up, 4, 2, and 3, you get 9 CFS. So in the first scenario, there's 10 CFS in the river and there's 9 people using the water, 9 CFS being used, then everybody gets the water, right? Now, the next scenario, there's only 5 CFS available. So you see the 1860, 1890, and 1880, those are the priority dates, right? So the oldest priority date gets the water first. So if you look at here, so if there's only 5 CFS in the river, then the 1860 right A, they get the first 4 CFS of it. But now there's only 1 CFS left to divvy out. So the 1880 right, so I'd go to 1880 and I'd say, okay, you get 1 CFS is all. Even though they're at the top of the stream, I said, you can only take 1 CFS and you have to let 4 go downstream. You can't take it all. And then the 1890 right, I say, you're done. You can't take any water. You have to shut off. And so that's how that works. And then the worst case scenario.
How do you determine why 1860 gets 4?
Because they have the oldest water right. And so
I understand that.
And the quantity. They have a water right that has a certain amount of quantity.
The quantity.
Right. Yeah. So the 1860 right has a 4 CFS water right. Let's say.
Okay.
And so before they have to cut at all, right? Everyone else has to shut off for them because they get the whole 4 CFS.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how you determine they get 4 no matter what. So
right, because say they have 20 acres or whatever it's tied to. There's the water right. All water rights are tied to a certain type of beneficial use. That would equate to 4 CFS. So if you have enough land, if you're irrigating, let's say, and your irrigation right is for X amount of acres and it would be 4 CFS of flow, that type of thing. Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Those communities that are being developed today that are just establishing water rights, they're last in line.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the challenge, they have to rely on perhaps using Central Utah Water or other water districts that were here a long time ago that acquired water rights maybe 100 plus years ago, and then buy that ability to use their water.
Where do like well rights come into play? Well water rights.
So well rights, it depends on the system. But so generally speaking, a lot of times groundwater is considered separate from surface water. There is definitely overlap, and there are systems and stuff where the state starts to say, actually, you know, say next to C, there's a big well that's pulling a bunch of water. You know, some of that water is being pulled through the river, right? The river is losing water to the ground. So in there are scenarios where that groundwater is affecting the surface water. And if that well came in 1950, right, it's after all of these other water rights. So there's an argument that can be made that says, oh, you're affecting the river, so you actually have to shut off or cut back or. And so, but it gets more complicated because it's harder to track. Like I was saying, I did groundwater before. It's all theoretical calculations, right? You're running models and everything, trying to understand it. You can't just physically measure the water and say it's there or it's not there, right? Yeah. So in that last case scenario, there's only 2 CFS in the river. Then I go to B and C and I say you can't take any water, and then I go to A and I say you get the 2 CFS that's available, but that's all there is, right? And in that scenario, that's a common scenario where, let's say the A is actually a bunch of water users that all have the same priority date. So, and that happens here. So like Orem and Provo, and you guys generally have the same priority date water rights. And so I would go to both of you and I'd say there's not enough water in the river, so you both have to cut equally. And whatever's available, you have to share what's available. Everyone else behind you, you know, that came later, I've shut off completely already. But if there's still not enough water for the senior water right users for the oldest priority date, then they have to equally split the water.
So they'll call that a haircut, right? On the water?
So that's the haircut terminology is more tied to groundwater type of stuff. I just call it cutting the Class A. Class A is the oldest water right on the Provo. And so I'll just call it a cut, a percentage cut. Yeah. And I think I have it.
And I've called it a haircut if it's change of use of water. So if you're going from ag water to M&I water.
M&I?
Municipal water.
Yeah.
So if you go from ag water to municipal water, you usually lose some of your, it's a haircut that you always call.
Right. That's generally if you're moving the water right to a different location and there's a lot of factors coming into play saying you've now moved it into the ground or you are changing the type of use from irrigation to municipal, the state will look at it and say, okay, how was that original water right used and how do we try to keep it tied to the original use? Because if, like, for example, if you have an irrigation right and you're only using it from April to October and you say, well, now I want to take that right and I want to move it into a well and I want to use it year round. Now that totally changes how you're using it. And so that it's not, it needs to resemble the original water right of irrigation. And so the state will look at it and say, well, how much volume did that actually use to begin with? And they'll look into that and then potentially give it a haircut to say this is trying to keep it in pattern with the original water rights. So you're not affecting the other users in the system. Yeah.
Sounds complicated.
It gets more complicated. Yeah. Yeah, this is the simplest of the simple right here, right? So here's just kind of, I actually drew this yesterday, so you know, not an artist, but here's just a quick, so I just drew the Provo River system, and I'm just kind of showing you all the different sources and the type of things coming along. So you first have Utah Lake and the Provo River. And one of the things you got to think about, how Chris kind of talked about, is you got to look on a timeline of when things were developed and created, right? So the first water users versus the later water users versus reservoirs that came along later and stuff too. So obviously, to begin with, you have Utah Lake, you have the Provo River coming up, and then so the first thing that I look at is I say, what the first water right that we're looking at is tied to what's called natural flow or direct flow water rights. And these were the first water uses, right? So the first pioneers, when they came in, there were no reservoirs, there wasn't anything going on. It was just what's available today in the river, can I divert it? And so they developed water rights based on the natural flow. And so that's the first thing I calculate. I say, what would the Provo River look like today if there was no reservoirs, no diversions, no water coming from the Duchesne or the Weber River, just what would it look like? What's the natural river look like today? And I run that calculation, and then that is the basis of, like we said, that prior appropriation that determines how many CFS are available to the water users.
Mouse, if you want to like point.
If I want to point anything, yeah. And so these arrows just represent that every day the river is producing water. So obviously during the runoff, when the snow's melting, that number is really big, right? Because you got tons of snow coming in. But even in the middle of August, the river is producing some water. There's springs and base flows coming in. And so the river is always producing a certain amount of water daily. And that's what those arrows represent. So then the next thing that kind of comes along is you get reservoirs being built. So you have Deer Creek or the upper lakes were actually built first, way up in the top of the system. And then they basically were lakes already existing in the Uintas, and they came along and just built little dams. I think there was probably 12 or 15 of them at one point. They just raised the lakes up a little bit and developed some storage water rights based on that. And they were for the users down at the very bottom into Utah Valley. And so they would actually have a guy up there and say, okay, release the water when it was end of July and they didn't have enough natural flow. They would say, release the water from the upper lakes and hopefully we can shepherd it all the way down to us. And so that's what would happen there. And then Deer Creek came along, and then Jordanelle came along last. And I'll talk about how those are able to fill up with water based on their water rights. And then one of the other things that came along too is we actually bring water from outside the Provo River. So now this is non-natural water. This we'll call it import water. And so the Weber Provo Canal was dug in the early 1920s-ish, somewhere in there, I believe, 1930s. And then the Duchesne Tunnel was built in the 40s. And that was to supplement water. And then to add to, so and primarily that water was said for Deer Creek, for the building of Deer Creek, so that Deer Creek would have a source of water to fill up with.
Has anyone been up to any of these sites like the Weber Provo Canal, that diversion, or the Duchesne Tunnel?
I didn't know they even existed, so.
Okay.
We should probably do a field trip with this group sometime.
That'd be fun.
That'd be awesome. We could do that.
If you ever get a chance, the Duchesne Tunnel is really cool because you look in the tunnel and it's 6 miles long, but it's so straight you can see the exit 6 miles away. It looks like a little star, like a dot of light. It's pretty cool.
That's if there's no bear in there.
Yeah.
Walking with you, but because it's pitch black and then you can walk in like 50 feet or so and it's like dark.
Does the upper Stillwater dam have any relation to this?
So indirectly, you guys can get water from the upper Stillwater Dam. So the very bottom one I'm showing is Strawberry Reservoir. And I should have drawn the river divide, but so the Strawberry actually, so there's the upper Stillwater, there's several drainages on the east side of the Continental Divide, right? This water that would flow to the Colorado River. And central Utah captures that water, starting with upper Stillwater, that's the furthest one, and then brings it in pipes and kind of diverts it all over and gets it into Strawberry Reservoir. So Strawberry Reservoir can fill with that. And then Strawberry releases it down the tunnel. And then you see this little black line. This is called the URS line. This comes out Spanish Fork Canyon, and then it goes along the Wasatch Front, and then it actually can deliver water into either the Provo River or into these are the different major pipelines off the Provo River. The Provo River Aqueduct, the Olmsted line, or the Salt Lake Aqueduct. It can deliver into the Provo River Aqueduct and the Olmsted Aqueduct. So physical water from Strawberry can come down and be actually pushed up into the Olmsted line, which could be delivered to you indirectly.
Yeah, we could be drinking water from Stillwater.
Is it flowing over this year like it did last year?
I don't know if it will. It probably will.
It's too early yet.
It's too early though, yeah. So they keep it as low as they can. It won't be until the runoff hits that it might spill over. Good. And then
let's see here. So then, the last thing I would point out is, so our diversions, especially the diversions tied to Orem. So the major ones are the Salt Lake Aqueduct, and these all these lines go up and can deliver all the way up into Salt Lake County, but they deliver to Orem along the way. So you all take water from the Salt Lake Aqueduct and the Olmsted Aqueduct. The PRA is the old Murdoch Canal. If you're familiar with the Murdoch Canal, that was piped, and then you don't take any water out of that currently, but it is a major pipeline through here. So. All right, so this is the Provo River Decree. So this is the 1921, which the adjudication of the Provo River means this is where they set. Here's the river Bible for the Provo River that started in 1921 that said, here's all the water rights associated with the Provo River. And this is essentially what I have to, this is my founding document that says this is how you deliver all the water to the water users all up and down the Provo River. So this was obviously built before there were any reservoirs. So the reservoirs come along, but they all are in line to the water rights here. And we'll get into your water rights specifically. So you got Orem's cut of the Provo River Decree. And then just to point out really quick, so when I talk about the oldest priority date, getting all the water that's left, in the Utah County and Utah Valley, we call it Class A water. So if you have a Class A water right, it means you have the oldest water right. And so there are several water users that have Class A water. Orem is one, Provo, and then Lehigh and some of the other cities, Pleasant Grove, they all have some Class A as well. So there's and so typically what's happened over time is there was these major ditches and canals that came off the Provo, the original ones that were built by the pioneers, and they were all Class A rights. And then as the cities developed, the cities purchased the water rights from these canals, and some of the canals still run, some don't, and they all have just moved into pipes and are all municipal use now. But they're all based on the Class A water rights, so they still have the senior priority in the system. But just to show you how dry things can get, so this is a 2021 list of where I showed the delivery percentage of Class A water. So you start April 12th, 2021, we were at 100% because it was a great, it was during runoff. The runoff was starting. And then by June 7th, so we're still, typically would still be during runoff, but it was such a dry year that I already cut it to 80%. And then I got as low as 30% cut in August and July. I had to cut back all the way down to 30%. So if you had a Class A water right, the best water right in the valley, you're only able to use 30% of it because the river was so dry. Such a dry year that year. So
do you just look at the flow in the river and determine that's 30% of what it should be?
So I don't
cut it.
I don't look at the physical flow. I calculate what the flow would be if there were no reservoirs and no diversions. So I have to say,
okay,
what would the Provo River look like today if nobody was doing anything? If it looked 200 years ago, right? Just what would it look like? And based on that number, and it's not a hard calculation. You just look at the change in the reservoir. So if the reservoir dropped 100 acre feet, that means 100 acre feet in the river is from a reservoir, not from the natural river, right? And then you just add up all the diversions off the river. And I don't look at every single drop that's being like little pumps and stuff here. I'm looking at the major diversions. And there's a couple little users that are taking just a couple drops of water that they don't affect the system, and so I don't actively track those.
So if Class A was cut to 30%, that means the other classes were at 0.
Right. Yep. And all the other classes would be.
So they were relying solely on well water or storage water.
Right. So in these scenarios, everybody's living off the storage water, and so storage water is a little bit different because once you store it in a reservoir, then it essentially sits there until you need it. Right. There's no priority date with the storage water. There's a priority date to store the water. It can only be stored at certain times of the year when you're in line, when there's enough water available for you to be in line. But you don't have to. But when you run out of your other sources, then you say, okay, storage is my last source of water. It's like your savings account. So you've got your natural flow is kind of like your check you get every 2 weeks. Like it's your check, you're living check to check, and you hope you have a savings account. So if one day your check dries up and you get fired or you don't get paid very much, then you can pull from your savings account, which is your reservoir. Yeah.
On that though, the reservoirs do have a classification as well, because if they spill, then the lowest classification spills first. So you have a classification system within the reservoirs themselves.
Right. That's another thing I track is the types of water that's in the reservoir. So everyone has a certain amount of water, and I'll talk about what Orem's portion is. Orem has a certain amount of water, a certain volume of water sitting in the reservoir. And yeah, it's subject to rules like it could spill. So in theory, like Deer Creek, if Orem never used their storage, and Deer Creek never filled all the way up, then every year they could build up a pretty good savings account sitting in the reservoir. And
If the reservoir goes dry.
But if the reservoir fills, well, if the reservoir filled, the reservoir would only go dry if you call for that water, right? So it's sitting in there waiting for you to call for it. And if you never call for it, then it just stays in the reservoir. Now, if the reservoir fills with new water coming in, the reservoir can only hold so much, so it spills out the oldest water first, which is the water you've been having sitting in there for years and years.
That's when we would lose our holdover water.
And that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And
Sounds complicated.
yeah, just think of we spill out the old water to make room for the new, because the reservoir can only hold so much. And the new water always has priority over the old water. So we can look at some of the water you have available to you. Do you guys think in millions of gallons MGD? Is that how you guys think? Or okay. So I convert it because I think in CFS and acre feet, but I know generally, cities think in MGD. So I did a calculation. It's good for me to remember to think about it too, to try to think about it. So one MGD is equal 1.5 CFS per day of flow a day. So looking at your water rights specifically, and these are kind of basic numbers. They do get more complicated and they vary throughout the year, and there's different rules tied to some of these water rights, but just kind of averaging, kind of making some generalizations about each water right. So here's your Class A bulk, the most senior rights on the river. So you have some Provo Bench / North Union shares. So there's a canal called the Provo Bench Canal that you own 53% of the shares out of it. And you actually don't even divert out of that canal anymore. And you take it all through different locations now. But the canal still does exist. There's still some people using water out of it for now anyway. And so you essentially have a water right of 42 CFS or 28 MGD. And that's with 0 cuts, right? That's how much water it would be today if there was no cuts to the river. You get 28 MGD. Then you also have another water right called the Blue Cliff right, and you have 18% of that water right. And so that equals about 5 CFS or 3.3 MGD. So some pretty good Class A water. So really in a good water year, you really don't have any need for any storage. So if there's no cuts to the river, it's pretty good. And then a Class D right is kind of one of the major high flow rights that we were talking about. That's a later priority date. That's typically only available during high flows during the runoff. And so most of the time, the high flow right is just only during the runoff. So around June, it's usually only available. And then it goes to 0. There's none available. But last year was such a great water year that at least some of that water right was available all summer long. I never cut it to 0. It cut down to, so it goes up to 164 CFS as a group. And I maybe cut it down. The lowest I think I saw was like 30 CFS. So you're still getting some water off of it all summer long last year. And you have 16% of that water right. And so but it's highly variable, right? So it could be 0, it could be up to 26 CFS or 17 MGD available to you during the runoff season. Some of the other natural flow rights that you have that are smaller rights that I didn't calculate there. You have a Dixon right, a right, and Shingle Creek. And so a lot of different natural flow rights. And again, these are all water rights that are available today. And if you don't use it today, then I give it to somebody else. So that's another thing to think about. If, say, you have, in our scenario, you had the 4 CFS available to you, but you didn't need it. It had rained a bunch and you weren't diverting anymore, or you're cutting your hay or whatever, you just not taking it. So you didn't take it that day, then it goes to the next person in line and I give it to the next person in line. So it's a use it today or it goes to somebody else today.
That's the beneficial use concept.
Right. Yep. So you can't typically store that natural flow, right? I mean, you guys got some tanks and stuff that you can store a little bit, but the general concept is it's available today at the river, and if you don't take it, I give it to the next person in line. Any questions about your so far? So here's your storage sources. So here's all the different water rights you have as storage. And so I think of storage as in acre feet, right? Because it's a volume. So CFS is a flow rate. That's how fast, how much water is flowing in a cubic feet per second. Because again, that's a water that's available to you at the moment. Where acre feet is a storage amount, it's a volume amount that's stored in the system, and it just sits there until you call for it. And so you've got several different types of water rights, different storages. You have the upper lakes we talked about at the top of the system. You have up to 306 million gallons, and these reservoirs are all subject to cuts too. So if the reservoir doesn't fill all the way, then you can't get 100% of the volume storage. It's all based on how full they get every year. Deer Creek, 6,300 acre feet is available to you. Jordanelle, 75. And then Echo Storage, and Echo Storage is a little bit unique water right that you have where, because Echo is on the Weber River, and so but the Provo River Water PRWUC is a water users company that owns some storage on Echo, and we can actually bring that across the canal on the Weber Provo Canal, that one import water that brings it from the Weber. So there is a little bit of Echo storage that's available to Orem to bring across and use it.
So Scott, when we say acre feet, is it how many households would an acre foot serve per year? I keep hearing different numbers. What do you understand it to be?
So in household, I don't really think in households, so I'm not sure. If you look at 3 acre feet is 1 million gallons.
Yeah.
Stop pointing. Okay, there you go.
20 households, acre feet per household.
Yeah. Any year. Right. Okay, yeah, that's a good way to show it in household system. So that's
For apartments, it's gonna be a lot less.
Yeah.
Right. For those with large yards, that irrigate a lot, it could be more. 1.5.
so it's 0.8, assuming a little bit of irrigation.
It's
lawn
yes.
irrigation.
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, because
Total use.
lawn irrigation is a big use of a household. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for master planning process, we would use that for a typical household and tie it to an equivalent residential unit.
So, well, we won't get into the weeds on this, but this is just an example of a spreadsheet that I send to Orem every year. And I'm just going to show you some of the basic concepts. So this top portion, that's actually just how much water is being used. That's physical water being diverted out of the Provo River that's going to Orem. And so you can see the label, the Utah treatment plant through Olmsted, the Utah treatment plant through the Salt Lake Aqueduct, the golf course, the Orem Canyon Parks. Those are the uses that Orem's taking from the Provo River. So that's the physical water being delivered.
Is that an acre feet or is that?
That's an acre feet. Yep, an acre feet. So that's how many total acre feet in those months that was delivered. And so what I do is I run numbers every day. So depending on the day, and then the next line is the sources down below, and the sources are the types of water rights that make it so you can take that water, divert that water. You can see how many different water rights there are tied to your portfolio.
Looks like a Yahtzee score sheet.
It is. And so these are all the natural flows that we were talking about that's available that day. So those are all the different types of natural flows that you have. And so I'm tracking that. And again, all these natural flows, it depends on what the river's doing, if there's cuts, if they're even available, is it runoff season. So those all come into play to say, here's how much natural flow you have available. And so generally speaking, sometimes you don't always follow this rule because of different things going on, but generally speaking, you'll take the natural flow first if it's available, because again, it's available today. If you don't take it, it's gone, it goes to somebody else. So generally you'll use the natural flow first if it's available, and then we start going into the storage amounts. So here's the Deer Creek water rights they're tied to it.
And how often do you calculate this?
So it's a daily calculation. Yeah.
How do you enforce it?
So enforcing, so the nice part of it, like a city like Orem, you have more than you need. You're never actually run out of water. And so what I do is you just take as much water as you want, and then I pull from the different sources until it meets your use. And there's always enough storage. The last water that you have available is the storage water, and you've always have enough storage available. So I never have to actually enforce Orem's water rights, because even if I cut Orem to the 30% Class A and it's a dry year, I just say, okay, look, you didn't have very much Class A available, so you had to pull a lot of storage. And every month I send this to these guys, and I say, here's how much water you have left. And so luckily you guys have never run out of water. You guys are pretty good at, cutting back. But if I had to enforce, so smaller users that run out of water a lot. So this happens with water users that don't have storage. So they get used to living off, even if they have a Class A water right, again, 100%, 30% is a big difference. And so in a dry year, they have to cut drastically if they're used to living off 100%, and they don't have any storage to supplement them. So there's a couple of different ways. I'll go to the water user and I'll say, hey, here's where you need to, this is how much water you have to take. You can't take more than this. And sometimes if it's like a head gate or something, I can actually set the head gate for that amount, and then they can't go over. One particular system that diverts water out of the Provo, it's a pressurized system. So there's no head gate at the river. It's all controlled by each individual user downstream at the bottom of the pressure. So they'll go to their users and say, hey, Scott cut the river to 30%. You guys got to not use very much. And they'll panic and say, I got to use it up while I can. And so they'll go turn it up and actually take more water. And there's no way to actually physically regulate them. Because they don't have controls on each of their water users. And so in that scenario, I actually shut them off about a month early. I said, you guys are in debt to the river. You've taken way more water than you're supposed to. So to pay back the river, I cut them off completely off a month early, and they went to zero.
And how do you calculate how much they've taken?
So there's meters on the pipes and stuff. Yeah, that's tracking how much water.
But not on the head gate.
So the head gate itself doesn't measure, but downstream of the head gate, you'll have like a flume, or if it's in a pipe, you'll have a meter that can read the flows. Yeah, that tracks it. So we have a way to measure the flow.
You're getting into an issue that's going to get more and more pressure for those that have water and have had it for a long time by those who are developing and coming in new. They're saying you have more than you need. Let us have some of that. And I can see where there's going to be more and more pressure over time legally to maybe modify some laws or to do some things differently. That might require us to maybe part ways with some water. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, nobody knows, but as there's more and more pressure, there's going to be more and more influence in the legislature, I think, by the developing community to maybe modify some current laws that we have.
Well, an example of that is, so Scott and I know each other from Hobble Creek, when I was in the county attorney's office. And Hobble Creek is, the Provo River doing pretty well. Hobble Creek's not.
Right.
And so Scott was talking about going and turning off people's houses' water, basically at one point. A couple of years ago, in 2021, and we had
That would be exciting.
Oh, so because they're over allocated 3 times up in that canyon. So there was these kinds of issues up there, and so Scott, you kind of became that river commissioner, as I recall.
Yeah.
About that time.
Yep.
And there were some threats that were made. Secondary water gets cut first, but then culinary water was also on the potential chopping block.
Right. And in at least verbally, we are telling people they can't divert water even for culinary use if they don't have a water right. So far, the state hasn't actually enforced it. And that's that last mechanism. If I need to enforce, is I give them what's called like a red tag. And it basically, I tag their system and I say, you're hereby notified that you cannot take more water. I either set them to a certain amount or they shut them off completely. And if they exceed that, then there's a state enforcement office that will come in and start fining and everything. I've heard like numbers like $5,000 a day or something. It can get pretty hefty pretty fast. Yeah. So Provo is a lot smoother sailing than Hobble Creek. Hobble Creek never was regulated until I started about 3 years ago. And so it's been a battle. Yeah, it's been a fun.
Elements.
So just going through, so there's Deer Creek rights, and then here's that upper lake storage that we track. And then your Jordanelle water as well.
This is just for Orem. He has to do this for everyone else,
For all the cities.
for all the cities and all the other users. So you can imagine.
It keeps me busy.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
You're not playing video games during work.
Right. Okay, and then it comes to, so this is just kind of a general idea of how the reservoirs are able to get their water. Because we talked about the natural flow being available, and well, then how do the reservoirs get the water? How do we fill the reservoirs? So one of the ways you can fill reservoirs is in the wintertime when the cities and the water users typically people aren't using as much water because we're not irrigating is the main driver, whether it's lawns or farms. Irrigation is the main use of the water. And so in the wintertime, nobody's using it. And so the reservoirs become the first in priority because all the other water, because a Class A water right, for example, is only available from about April 15th to October 15th. Then your Class A water right is actually shut off. It's because it was originally tied to those irrigation rights. And so when all the other Class A water rights, the next available would be potentially for the reservoirs. And so here's kind of how we fill in the wintertime, how we can fill Deer Creek and Jordanelle. And so the only big water right that's in priority in the wintertime is the are you familiar with the Olmsted power plant? So the Olmsted power plant was, main diverter off the river, and it would generate water in the wintertime. It could call up to 429 CFS of the river if it was available for electricity production. And so what happened was when Jordanelle, so that 429 would route through and then go through. And so I'm going to skip forward that. And then Deer Creek was like, well, we want to fill up with water, but the power plant said, well, sorry, we need the water for power production. You can't take it. So Deer Creek still didn't have a water right to fill up in the winter unless we were higher than 429 CFS. If the river exceeded 429, then the power plant said, I'm happy. You can have anything above that because I can't divert more than that. So then Deer Creek could fill up on full flows that were above the 429. And so then what Deer Creek did to supplement that, because the river doesn't get above 429 all that often, is Deer Creek went and said, let's dig the Duchesne Tunnel and the Weber Provo Canal, right? Let's go find water outside the river, the Provo River, and bring it in. So Deer Creek is primarily, I would say primarily filled with import waters. So a lot of the times the imports make up the largest percentage of their water is bringing it across. But then the Jordanelle wanted to be built, and Jordanelle didn't have any more access to the imports because Deer Creek had them all. And they said, okay, how do we fill Jordanelle? Jordanelle is a lot bigger than Deer Creek. So what they did is they essentially purchased the power. They went to the power plant and said, we're buying you out. You're now owned by us. So now Jordanelle owned the Olmsted power plant. So that big block of 429 CFS, Jordanelle said, well, we can either produce power off of it, the 429, or we can interfere with our own water right, because it's our water right, we can do it. And we'll just take that water, instead of running it through the power plant, we'll store it in Jordanelle. And that's what they did. So now Jordanelle's actually kind of jumped ahead of Deer Creek as far as the Provo River is concerned, and it fills up based on the winter low flow rights. So that's how Jordanelle gets their water.
So what water's used at the Olmsted right now?
So there's minimum releases that are made out of Deer Creek for environmental reasons, and but there are scenarios where the power plant's not producing anything. So, and then like today, there's water there because the reservoirs are so full that they're not storing right now, so they're sending more water down, and so the power plant still produces any water that does come down, so they make a little bit of their money back off the power plant.
Wonder if they charge us for power interference if it's not running.
No. So they won't do. If the power plant's offline, they don't charge power interference. Yeah. Or if the power plant is at capacity, then they don't charge power interference, right? So that's how the reservoirs fill in the wintertime. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Utah Lake as well in a second, but because Utah Lake is actually ahead of these other reservoirs. And so Utah Lake is a reservoir. It has a dam and it's filled. You don't think of it as a reservoir, but it fills up and it has a storage component to it. And so actually all of this water that Jordanelle and Deer Creek are filling up is actually technically supposed to go to Utah Lake first. And I'll talk about how we keep them whole in a second. But then the summer allocation is a little bit different, right? So we talk about the Class A. The Class A users are the priority water user. So that first 229 goes to the Class A users. And then if the Class A users are below the power plant, then the water actually runs through the power plant and then delivers to the Class A users. And then the Class D water right is the 164. And then anything above that, there's 200 CFS that goes to the power plant again, or to Jordanelle if they want to store it. And then anything above those numbers, again, that all adds up. Well, the 229 and 200 is the 429 plus the 164 for the Class D irrigation. Anything else goes to the Deer Creek to fill, and once Deer Creek's full, then any of the higher flows can actually go to Jordanelle. Jordanelle can take the really high flows too if Deer Creek's full.
And Deer Creek's full now?
Deer Creek's full now, yeah. Yes, and Jordanelle is actually going to start going down more because they're making room for the runoff. So
I was wondering
so they don't want to fill right now. Yeah, it's funny. It's everything changes in a wet year versus a dry year. In a dry year, we don't send an extra drop out to Utah Lake that we don't have to. Everything's at minimum all year. But in a wet year, we haven't been at minimum all year. We've been sending extra water down just because there's so much water in the reservoirs. There's nowhere to put it, so we just don't have big enough reservoirs.
It's a good problem.
Yeah, it is a good problem to have. So then the last question is, what about Utah Lake? And so, because all this water, Utah Lake has a pretty early priority date. It's ahead of Deer Creek. It's ahead of Jordanelle. So when I talk about this extra water being used to fill Deer Creek and Jordanelle, it actually is it's interfering with Utah Lake's water right. And so what they've done is they said, okay, Utah Lake, we are going to store some of your water that's supposed to go to you. We're going to store it in Deer Creek. We're going to store it in Jordanelle. And if Utah Lake, you don't get enough water to be happy, we're gonna pay you back somehow. We have a couple different options. And so that purple line you see on this graph, it's called the conversion line. So if you maybe heard a compromise line, they're different. So compromise is when Utah Lake is full, completely at the top. Conversion line is representing how much water Utah Lake needs for their water users to be, so that they don't need any more water than that. That's conversion line is saying if we have enough water to meet this, if we're at this level, then Deer Creek and Jordan, you can keep all the water you want, and we don't care. You can have it. And so Utah Lake has to get to a certain elevation, which this year, obviously, they're full this year. And then in that scenario, Deer Creek and Jordan can keep the water for free. They don't have to pay it back. Now, if it doesn't meet that, if we don't get that high, the way they pay it back is that strawberry water we were talking about, strawberry reservoir. It brings water and it can put water directly into Utah Lake. So Jordanelle can pay by importing water from Strawberry and putting it directly into Utah Lake and saying, okay, we're keeping Jordanelle water, so we're going to pay you back with Strawberry water. And that's one of the ways to do it. Another way is Jordanelle has bought water rights in Utah Lake and said, we'll say we're not going to use those. We'll just give them to you guys to use, and you guys can have our water that we've purchased out of Utah Lake. And then Deer Creek is similar. Deer Creek has a water right that can bring water from the Weber-Provo Canal during really high water years and import it directly into the lake. So essentially, Utah Lake's being paid with imports from the Weber or the Strawberry, and we put it into Utah Lake to make them whole, so that we can keep storing water in the Deer Creek and Jordanelle. And so, but again, this year is a great year because the Utah Lake's full. So Utah Lake says, we don't care how much you take. And we're saying, well, we don't need any, so we're giving it to you anyway. So nobody wants water this year. Everyone's trying to figure out how to give it away.
They send it to Great Salt Lake.
And so the Great Salt Lake's the last guy on the list. He's all the way at the bottom of the totem pole that says, all right, I'll take it if no one else wants it. And what's interesting about that is, so last year, right, record-breaking snowpack, record runoff last year, we didn't send an extra drop of water to the Great Salt Lake from Utah Lake. Utah Lake was so empty last year that our incredible runoff just filled Utah Lake, but didn't spill it. It filled it right almost to the top, and then it stopped. And so we didn't send any water to the Great Salt Lake last year. But this year we already are sending water to the Great Salt Lake, which, because Utah Lake was so full from last year, it only took just regular winter flows to spill it. So it's spilling right now.
We had Utah Lake to fill last year. We had Jordanelle to fill last year.
Jordanelle was empty.
Now everything's full, and
so yeah. So it's having 2 wet years in a row is really beneficial because it pushes all that extra water to the Great Salt Lake. Yeah. So, all right, that's all I have. Is there any other specific questions or?
Well, it's pretty simple, actually.
Yeah, not too bad. That's a picture of the Weber-Provo Canal at full capacity. So
That's at the bottom of the slough.
yeah, right before it goes into the Provo River.
I have a question.
Yeah.
With all of you on the news talking about Salt Lake going dry, did that eventually impact our water rights and security?
Current laws today, no, because the Great Salt Lake has no water rights, but the legislation is always playing around with those. So the laws could change and things could happen. But like you talked about, potentially Orem losing some of their water rights for some certain reasons. But today's laws say, no, you're good. There's no law to take your water.
The only caveat to that is there's litigation pending right now over the Great Salt Lake and Provo River could be impacted by that litigation if the plaintiffs were successful. There's a lot of folks, including Century Hall Water and others, who are defending against that lawsuit, trying to get it dismissed. In fact, they'll be filing a motion to dismiss this week. But that if it were to go the plaintiff's way, which I don't think it will, it could impact. It would essentially cause a general adjudication to happen in the Great Salt Lake Basin, which all the water flows, the 7 the 7 flows that go into Great Salt Lake would all end up having a general adjudication. And they're asking within 10 years.
No.
And to maintain a certain level, 4198 at the Great Salt Lake, which right now it's about 4192, 4183, I think, elevation.
What that means is that it would create a new rule book.
Correct.
And standard, a Bible for the new future
It would
of how
also
to
have a
manage
haircut.
systems.
Yeah.
What's that?
It would haircut the
Yeah.
other system.
Now, does that take legislation to do that?
No, it's a lawsuit that's pending, and there is a lot. There was I can't count how many bills are in this year. Maybe Scott knows all those, but there's a lot.
No.
There were so many bills. I haven't even finished looking through them all.
Mhm.
But that legislation, excuse me, that lawsuit is it's pending. It was filed last summer-ish, September. I can't remember for sure, but it was filed by kind of conservation type groups, things that try to save the Great Salt Lake. And the problem with Great Salt Lake is that you put all the water you put in there evaporates out pretty quickly. Yeah. So it's a no-win battle. Anyway,
Yeah. All you can do is just keep feeding it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't store it.
I remember the years they had the pump, they built the pumps out there
Yeah.
to pump extra water out of the Great Salt Lake.
Which I don't think they ever used them.
I
Yeah.
don't know if they did or not.
But I have 2 laws that I've proposed. So far, they haven't taken up. The first law is banning droughts. If we ban droughts, then it'll be a problem. The second law is all this money we're putting in to try to help the Salt Lake. I think we should have some funding set aside to pay people just to pray for more snow. We'll give you $10 if you say a prayer or whatever. Call it good. And those are the 2 that I proposed, but they haven't taken them up.
I have a third one is no more development.
Well, there you go.
We can control all those things and we'll be okay.
I think mine are more likely to pass than yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Well, thank you so much, Scott. Any questions?
Yeah.
So will you share this so we can
Yeah.
give this to everybody?
Yeah.
And
He already emailed it to me.
Yeah, got it. Yep.
great, thank you. It's quite fascinating, the law, and you learn something new every time you meet with Scott. And we meet with him a lot. So he does a fantastic job managing the river and different issues associated with the river, and it gets more challenging as there's a greater demand on the system, meaning less water, higher demand, more conflict.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll have to deputize us to help him out on the river. I don't know.
Do that.
What'll happen in the future, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, that's always wondered, how do you enforce?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Might have a badge. I don't know. I've never
I
seen
do
it.
have a badge.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I have a magnet I can put on my truck that says Division of Water Rights. So I can be incognito or I can put my magnet on. Display my colors.
well,
Okay,
fantastic.
thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
We do have, we have a quorum right now, so we could do minutes. Do we still have
Yeah, I think Brent's on.
Brent's online? Brent, can you hear us all right?
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes then from last month? So moved. A second, Gary?
Second.
Okay, in favor, aye?
Aye.
Yeah, so that's good. So next meeting,
Next meeting we'll have next month. Let's see, we have some conferences over the next month, so we need to check our dates before we can give you a date on that.
okay,
And yeah, and maybe some travel that we may have. So we're gonna have to get back with you on a date specifically. Just
I'm gone the week of the 15th.
the week of the 15th. Let's make a note of that. It's normally what is today? We normally meet on the second Tuesday, right?
No, 3rd.
Is it the 3rd?
Yeah, we're gone. We're gone next week, so we moved.
Yeah,
bumped
that's
it.
right. We moved it up a week. Okay, so you're gone the week of the 15th. How about Robert or Gary? Do you have any?
I'm okay.
You're available?
The Tuesdays, right? So
Yeah, 23rd.
Probably WEAU.
It might be. Do you happen to have that on your calendar or not?
I think I do, yeah.
Both of those days are fine with me. 30th, have you said? Oh, night.
Provo, Weber, where is it?
3:30 is WEAU.
Jordan now
23rd.
is above Jordan now.
23rd work.
It runs, Camas Valley.
We're out of
Runs
town.
through Camas
There's a
Valley.
conference that weekend
Oh.
for the Water Environment Association of Utah.
How about the 30th?
That'll be a bad day for me.
It would be?
Once it gets wedding anniversary.
Well, I'm not gonna.
Congratulations.
That fight, so.
You do like a big cake and stuff and have it.
Yeah.
We might need to go to May 14th.
Find that day.
Brent, does May 14th work for you?
Yeah, any of those dates works for me.
Okay, let's plan for that, April.
May 14th works.
All right, thank you. So we'll skip next month. We wanted to give you a quick update just over the next minute here. We are meeting with our council right now in groups of 2 or 3 at a time to give them updates on certain city needs and high priority issues. One of which is with respect to Public Works is our capital facility plan at the Orem Water Reclamation Facility. You're aware that we adopted that, the city council adopted that plan a year ago. And it is a $160 million plan to make major improvements, many of which are for unfunded regulations that are imposed on us by the US EPA and Division of Water Quality. And others are that our plant is over 60 years old. It's 66 years old. Is that right? 1958. So it's old. And I know that as I get older, there are things that don't work as well as they used to. And
You wait.
You wait. Okay. So naturally, anything that's man-made will eventually fail. And we try to limp things along the best we can and do our best to make sure that it will last as long as it can. But of course, we need to always operate it, repair it, maintain it, and then eventually replace it. And then as needs grow, then we have to expand. And as other demands are applied, such as water quality, then we have to improve our processes to make sure that we can produce the level of quality to be able to discharge back in the lake. And so some of those demands have increased quite a bit and dramatically. We're not immune to that. Everyone else in the valley and Salt Lake and so forth has similar concerns and issues and challenges. So we're meeting with them, and we're going to try to develop a plan where we have a series of 4 to 5 phases to be able to implement and construct this over the next 20, maybe 25 years. So we will probably maybe give you an update of that at that time. I think we probably will have met with Laura by that time, don't you think, Reed? And where we can come back and share with you what we're going to be proposing to be able to make this the least painful for the citizens of Orem, but yet be able to satisfy the needs of regulations and failing infrastructure. So it's a challenge, but I think we're up for it, and it may not be as bad as it sounds right off the bat. So
I think a better term than failing infrastructure would be aging infrastructure.
Oh. Okay.
Failing seems more pertinent though.
Yeah, that's true. That's
critical.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Anything else, Reed, or others? Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You've been involved in the legislature this year a little bit.
Thank you.
Specifically on water rights.
See you, Brent.
Yeah, a little.
Thanks, Brent.
Yeah.
Things too, but yeah.
But it's gonna get